Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Our next speaker is Mac Bica. Mac Bica is a Vietnam combat vet, is in the Marines, and is now coordinator of the Hootch program. Mac Bica.
Good morning. Some gentlemen will be passing out some statistics, rundown, some interesting facts that most of you probably know already, but just thought I'd bring them to your attention. I like to, over the years, like to maintain a file of these little tidbits and just, because there's some weird information on there, as you see when you look. Yes? Our cameraman is out. What I'm basically going to be doing up here, I'm going to try and cut it short to try and get us back on schedule a little more. I'm going to basically try and give you a foundation upon which we can move on into the more technical aspects of why we're here today. Our main focus, of at least the morning, is going to be PTSD. So maybe we can just go through a little background about the kinds of experiences Vietnam veterans had. And I'm sure this is not going to be very new to those of you who were there, but it may be a little new to family who may not have had the opportunity to look inside our heads over the years. We have a tendency not to want to share these kinds of things with others. But maybe this is a good time when we can start. I want to begin a little bit about maybe about our pre-Vietnam experiences. We're from a generation, most of us are in our late 30s now, early 40s, mid-40s, growing up during Kennedy's Camelot. And I remember watching that inaugural address where, Kennedy asked not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That was very impressive. I mean, at the time, I remember getting goosebumps. I was naive, what did I know? So these are the kind of things we experienced. I also remember watching Pride of the Marines with John Wayne and Sands of Iwo Jima, and idolizing these people and saying, "Whoa, how noble these heroes are, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. These are the kind of people that made America free, America great." I remember also listening to my father and uncles and grandparents as they sat around a table playing brisk. Is this kind of I don't know if everybody familiar with brisk? Yeah, it's kind of an Italian game. I think it is anyway. Most of the terms that they use in Italian, but that might be just because they all spoke Italian. But all World War II veterans, and I used to sit by on the side, keeping out of the way of them, not making a nuisance of myself, but trying to overhear, their exploits, their adventures, and landing in Normandy, and the invasion of Sicily, and fighting in North Africa. And I was always impressed by this because the only exposure I had to these kind of things was reading it in history books. So here I was in actual contact with people who made history. Very impressive, I thought. So the stage was kind of set when I was coming of age, and when my country, when I had to ask what I can do for my country. So when Vietnam came along, it was the thing that I was to do. I chose not to go to Canada. I chose not to utilize any kind of deferment. I chose to ask what I could do for my country. And what my country wanted at the time was for me to go to Vietnam. And I think we all had that alternative in one way or another, whether we enlisted or whether we were drafted. We still had the option of running away, of utilizing. I mean, I think they used to call them coffee shops. back in the 60s, where they would offer counseling how to stay out of the service. So, I mean, I'm sure the upper class had more opportunities to do this than the lower class did, but there were ways of getting out, but we chose to go. Once we consented to this, once we made a decision to take part in the military, we were shipped off to this strange and alien place called basic training or boot camp. It didn't take long for us to realize once we got off that bus that this was not a place that we were used to. This was not a place where we were going to party. This was a complete change. This was an alien world, and we were shortly and quickly and brutally indoctrinated into what was ahead in our future. I mean, individualism was left behind. It was the group, survival of the group. That was the name of the game. That's where we were going. I mean, this was clearly demonstrated by the balding of our heads and removal of all any kind of clothing which gave us individualism. We all wore the same, looked the same, and we were going to act the same. Any kind of similarity to the past is purely coincidental. Now, the kinds of behavior which were instilled, those adolescents, our peers, who had the luxury of growing up in a civilian type environment, had behavior reinforced upon them that was suited to the role they were expected to take on. I think in most cases, clergy, school teachers, our family encouraged understanding, rationality, passivity, compassion for the fellow man, for the most part. I mean, these are the kinds of behaviors which were encouraged in the developing adolescent who was fortunate enough to be a civilian, who was hopefully befitting their role in society. We had a different role in society. Our role, we were being developed. Our role that we were expected to take on in a matter of months was a role of warrior. And the main function of a warrior is to kill. So a soldier on a battlefield who sits down and talks with his enemy and tries to work out a situation is really exhibiting deviant behavior for the role he's assuming. So naturally, different kinds of behavior were encouraged in us. Brutality was emphasized, the ability to kill, cruelty, take no quarter. I mean, these are the kinds of behaviors which we needed to survive on the battlefield, and these are the kinds of behaviors which were instilled in us and which we readily accepted. This was our experience during our critical developmental transition between adolescent and adulthood. This was a foundation upon which our maturity was going to be built. A building is just as strong as the foundation upon which it's built. So it didn't take long for us to realize that we were different and we were not the same. But it was noble. I mean, ask not what we can do. Ask not what our country can do for us. Ask what we can do for our country. Normandy, North Africa, Sicily, a noble effort. Knights in shining armor. John Wayne landing on Iwo Jima. Visions of sugar plums dancing in our head. Boot camp and basic training was a very effective means of effecting the transition from adolescent or boyhood into adulthood. But lessons weren't all we received. Once we arrived in Vietnam, the lessons were readily reinforced. We learned very soon that yes, that was the kind of behavior that was going to allow us to survive 12 or 13 months in this nightmare. That those were the proper ways of acting if we were going to do what we had to do and get the hell out of there and get home. So not only were we handed a bill of goods, but the environment which we were plucked into or put into reinforced that bill of goods. It made the lesson even make a greater impact on our being. Now Vietnam itself was unique in a number of different ways. Now, it wasn't during World War II. I mean, we always hear about well, mostly Marines, but there were Army in the Pacific too, fighting in jungles. But Vietnam wasn't that kind of jungle warfare, where two conventional armies confronted each other in an environment that just happened to be a jungle. Vietnam was an unconventional conflict against an indigenous revolutionary army. The people who we were fighting lived in that area. They grew up in that area, and they've been fighting, and their ancestors have been fighting for hundreds of years. The army was unlike any we had struggled against before. They rarely wore uniforms, and you all know the kinds of things that were perpetrated on us and we perpetrated on others. It was an unconventional type of warfare. One of the tactics utilized was trying to hide themselves and blend in with the environment, blend in with the distinction between those we were there to protect and those we were there to kill blurred. We weren't sure what was going on. We weren't sure who the enemy was. Now, an unconventional army plays off this. This is their ace in the hole. And with the intelligence that they so readily have, that they can choose the most opportune moments to confront the invading army. And the majority of times, naturally, that they choose to confront was when they had the advantage. Vietnam was strange in a way, too. It always reminds me of an Alfred Hitchcock movie, as I think back on it. Alfred Hitchcock, to me, was such an effective film director, was that he spent the first hour or so of a movie boring the hell out of us. I mean, he lulled us into a sense of complacency where our guard was down, we were relaxed, and all of a sudden shocked us with some bloody, horrible scene. I mean, the classic example sticks in my mind is that infamous shower scene in Psycho. I mean, I remember just being so bored with what was going on. They're walking, they're talking, and then all of a sudden being shocked by an instantaneous blast of emotion, of fear, of terror. For a lot of us, Vietnam was like that. Vietnam, we might go days, weeks, maybe even months of experiencing the mundane, boring day-to-day activities of an occupying army. And then one night or whatever, we'd be confronted with unbearable and agonizing terror, quick, bloody, and all of a sudden, the phantoms which perpetrated this atrocity, in our eyes anyway, disappeared almost like magic, blending back into the environment or into the lava tunnel systems which they had around the country. That first one. I want to talk a little bit about the reactions. I gave you a little background about the basic training and about the kinds of things we confronted in Vietnam and kinds of things we had to deal with once we experienced what the hell was really going on in war. I mean, the first thing that occurred to me when I got to Vietnam was I remember doing what they call acclimatizing. I was in a fire base and there was some incoming sappers, and somebody pushed me into a bunker and said, shut up and stay there, and I did. And I just remember looking up and seeing all these beautiful, tracer rounds and flares and smoke and all kinds of elaborate things. I mean, if I wasn't so afraid and if my rear end wasn't puckering so hard, I probably could have almost enjoyed the light show. But it struck me then, and I remember to this day, that I almost was listening for the Marine Corps hymn to be playing in the background. And it wasn't there. And here was my indoctrination. Here was my first realization that I've been taken into the myth. Vietnam confronted us with a moral dilemma also. Just by virtue of the kind of war a guerrilla type conflict is, as I mentioned before, the distinctions between combatant and non-combatant are blurred, are hazy. Classic traditional just war theory dictates that those who fight in a battle, and if the battle is just, we have to respect the immunity of non-combatants. Those that are civilians shall not be killed. Those that are combatants are liable to be killed, or are liable in a sense that they qualify for killing. And if we cross the bounds, we're violating just war theory. Vietnam, these bounds were utilized by the enemy, by those who were struggling for their own freedom or for whatever their justification was. So this presented a moral dilemma to us. We knew basically that we were here to help somebody, I thought. But who were these people we were trying to help, and who were these people we were trying to help protect them from? We couldn't tell. So now we started to wonder, are we killing the right people? Or do we kill everyone and let God sort them out? I remember in World War II, it was from I'm not old enough to remember it personally, but from my readings, it was obvious that the cause was just in World War II. I mean, we had an obvious maniac who was trying to take over the world. The soldiers, the warriors back then were trying to stop Hitler and Mussolini and free the Jews and free the Poles and keep the world safe for democracy and for freedom. I mean, it was an obvious objective. A poll that was taken in Vietnam in 1970 showed that 7 out of every 10 combatants, 7 out of every 10 soldiers who were fighting in Vietnam didn't really know why they were there. So we really lacked that ideological belief, that dedication to the cause, because we weren't sure what the hell the cause was. I mean, to this day, I talk to Vietnam veterans, and in the conversation it comes up, who are we, what side were we on, the South or the North? I mean, that's how blurry it was. That's how unsure we are what the heck we were doing. In World War II, in Korea, it was the tactics that we employed were clear-cut. There was a hill, we took a hill, we held the hill, we defended the hill against counterattack. After a few days, we got down off the hill, attacked the next hill, held that hill against counterattack, and so on until all the land was taken, the war was over, goodbye, we go home. Very obvious, very clear-cut tactics. Unfortunately, land acquisition was not one of the goals of Vietnam. We took hills, we suffered up the slopes of these hills, we bled on the slopes of these hills, we lost people on the slopes of these hills, and 2-3 days later, we walked off this hill, giving it back to those we fought to take it from, who didn't really want it anyway. So, what were we doing? What does victory mean? In World War II, victory meant when we took the entire, when we landed on Guadalcanal, when we occupied all Guadalcanal, that battle was over, we won. We weren't doing that in Vietnam. We weren't occupying land. Vietnam was a war of attrition. Nice word. Attrition meant victory and defeat were gauged. It was a computer war, a mathematical war. Ratios determined victory and defeat. In an operation, if we counted enemy bodies and we found, say, 100 enemy bodies, and we had 3 American body bags, the ratio was that of victory. If it was opposite, it was that of defeat. It was a war of killing. Now that sounds strange to say because all war was killing. But the goal of this war, victory of this war, was not in terms of what you can do, but who you can kill. Body count. I mean, people became generals on the basis of the body count that their unit encouraged, that their unit achieved. So those of us on the small units would try anything. I mean, we dig up graveyards to produce bodies. If they're dead, they're VC. The only thing that we were sure of was that people were dying. The only thing we were sure of, that people were suffering, that the maimed, that the crippled were constantly draining out of Vietnam. Lacking the ideological goals, the ideological beliefs, the just cause of the war, lack of the understanding of how we were fighting the war, Vietnam became a solitary individual war, a war of survival, our personal survival. Oh, I go through anything? Oh, you did. I forgot all about that damn thing. Okay, that's it for that. Well, let's talk a little about the psychological considerations. So psychologists and psychiatrists like to at the risk of trying not to offend anybody, but they like to study. I mean, that's normal. It's an intellectual drive to understand things, research. I mean, psychologists, psychiatrists also study man's behavior during war. And one of the things that they discovered studying combatants during World War II was that as the fighting intensified, the number of psychiatric casualties intensified. That makes kind of sense. A lot of fighting, a lot of horror, a lot of people suffering breakdowns. They also discovered that that individuals who saw the most combat suffered the most frequency of psychiatric casualties. During World War II, 101 out of every 1,000 combatants was psychiatric casualties. That's a staggering amount. So something had to be done about this, because we need to produce future warriors. So psychologists, psychiatrists got at work and tried to come up with a solution, and they did. Our next place to see how well we're coming along was Korea. Now in Korea we changed somewhat. World War II we were committed, the combatants were committed for the duration of the war. There was 3 ways you were getting home: either dead, either wounded, or if the war was over. Those are the 3 ways. You were committed for the duration. Korea slightly modified that. They developed a point system where, based on the amount of the number of missions you were on, or based about your time in country, or based about whatever, when you achieved your points, you were rotated. You were rotated home. Also, a new breed of warrior came about, and I like to call them combat psychiatrists. Combat psychiatrists came up to virtually the front lines and treated psychiatric casualties right or very near the front, with the idea in mind that we will not let these people get out. We're going to keep them there, talk to them, and get them back to the unit as quickly as possible, and rely on unit cohesion and peer pressure to bring them back into the program. Well, did it work? Well, statistics show that in Korea, 37 out of every 1,000 combatants became psychiatric casualties. Significant drop. But what the statistics don't show was that how many of these renewed combatants put themselves in harm's way and became casualties, or deserted, or went over the hill, or did, other things in order to alleviate their stress and their strife. Now, if this works this much here, let's do this much now. So when we came to Vietnam, we had a new tactic. It was called DEROS, and I'm sure all you guys and ladies who are in Vietnam know what DEROS. What DEROS was for a date of expected return from overseas, and we lived for DEROS. Now, if you were in the Army, you were there for 12 months. In Marine Corps, you were there for 13 months, and you knew just when you were going home. So you had the consolation in your mind knowing that you weren't there for the duration, and you know there were other ways of going home besides in a body bag or aboard a medevac. Also, in Vietnam, we utilized R&R, rest and recuperation, whereby I think we were allowed 1 out of country and 1 or 2 within country. And if your unit was a real tough ass and you had a high body count in an operation or something, you'd be awarded an additional 3-day R&R at China Beach or whatever. I was up north, so I don't know what was the R&R center down south. armed with these new significant innovations in the way we handle combatants, the psychiatric casualty rate in Vietnam was 12 out of every 1,000. Wow. From 101 out of every 1,000 in World War II to 12 out of 1,000 in Vietnam. So what's all this fuss about? Why are you people here on Saturday morning? Should be home in bed, relaxing, enjoying your wonderful transition from warrior to civilian. Well, unfortunately, the arrows had some side effects. Go ahead. No, I don't think I do. Am I over yet? Am I on a second sheet? Well, forget about the sheets then. The side effects of the arrows. The arrows, World War II units arrived in country together, fought in country as a bound, cohesive unit, and left as a bound, cohesive unit. Vietnam was units stayed in country, individuals rotated in and out. A lonely plane ride over. Now, when we arrived in country, they gave us a week or so, in most cases, to acclimatize, to adjust to the severely different climate. After that period of time, we were assigned to a line unit or whatever, at which time we were regarded as cherries or FNGs, fucking new guys, and we were kind of held aside because naturally we were a threat to those battle-hardened people who knew how to act in combat. New guys weren't sure yet of how to handle it, of how to act, of what to do. They weren't tested. We weren't sure what they were going to do under the stress. So the first month or so, maybe more, depending on the number of operations you were involved in, you stayed aside until you proved yourself. So it was a lonely existence for the first month or two, maybe more, until you were accepted into the main body, until you were accepted, you were idolized or held in esteem because of your prowess, your cruelty, your brutality. Also, many units had a policy of transferring short-timers out of frontline units where the likelihood of becoming a casualty was a higher rate, and tried to put you into a relatively safer environment, a base camp or fire base, for your last month or so, the old short-timers thing, hopefully keeping you out of harm's way. So now you were separated again from all these kinds of things serve to work on the cohesiveness which a unit developed. World War II, they were very cohesive units. It was esprit de corps was high. Everyone loved their unit and the comrades they fought in. And Vietnam was beset with individuals going their own way, going and coming, going to guard, going emergency leave, going to dentist, going constantly turmoil, constantly. And this suffered. This made unit cohesion and esprit de corps suffered. And one of the byproducts of that was that esprit de corps and unit cohesion was a buffer against the trauma of war. And when individuals were close, they could work out the trauma, the stress. We lacked that buffer zone, that cohesion, that ability to relate to closely to friends, where we can work off these kinds. We can come to an understanding of what was going on and what we were doing. Also, in combat, it wasn't a good idea to get too friendly with people. We wanted everyone to be our buddy because we relied on them to make sure that no one's at our back, to protect our back. But we don't want to get too friendly with them because inevitably our friends get killed. And now we have to suffer that grief. In Vietnam, we didn't have time for grief because grief, to start the grief, would be to put our unit, ourselves, or our comrades in jeopardy. The mission would suffer. There's no time for grief. Turn off the grief. Turn off the emotions. The mission, go on. This is what's referred to as psychic numbing, the turning off of emotions, the ability to feel. So you wives and family members out there, when you say to yourself that my husband or my boyfriend or whatever is cold or he doesn't feel, it might have something to do with the kinds of experiences that were forced on him in the battlefield. Now, although psychological breakdowns did go low in Vietnam, the symptoms that were manifested from stress and from combat were only delayed. They weren't done away with. Deros promised us a way out. So we said to ourselves, if we can only hang out, we can only survive for another 2, 3, 4 months, we'll be out of this place. We'll be back. We'll be back in the world where everything is roses and everything is well. And in order to withstand those 2 or 3 months, we self-medicated. We prescribed our own medication, whether it be drugs or alcohol, to take the edge off the stress in order to do what we had to do. Diros, when we did achieve our Diros, when we finally did jump on that freedom bird, we jumped on by ourselves. We're a head full of mixed emotions. We're happy as hell to get out of this place. But we're a little guilty of leaving our comrades behind. What was happening back there? And World War II veterans are notorious for their reunions. Let's have a reunion. Let's have a reunion. Get all the guys together from the unit. Vietnam veterans tend to shy from reunions. And one of the reasons might be that we're afraid to look up people, with the idea that if we do look them up, we're going to find that they were killed. And I know that if I was still there, that person wouldn't have died, because I was a badass point man. And if I was a badass platoon commander, or I was a badass machine gunner, and if I was with that unit, that wouldn't have happened. Joe wouldn't have stepped on that mine. That sniper wouldn't have got Joe. We wouldn't have fallen into that ambush. A mixed bag we're carrying home with us on that freedom bird. World War II veterans had the luxury of coming home in mass, spending weeks, maybe months aboard a ship with the individual, with their buddies that they fought with, trained with. A wonderful opportunity for them to work out their experiences, their trauma, the stress of combat, and talk about what they did and why they did it. World War II veterans can. I'm not trying to say that they were any better than us, or we should have more sympathy for them, but I'm trying to show the differences. World War II veterans came home to victory parades and celebrations. Vietnam veterans came home to anti-war protests. We were ostracized by those who hated the war as being the killers, and those who liked the war for being losers. No one liked us. Where did we fit in? I remember reading something that in World War II they took over a big resorts hotel somewhere, I don't remember where it was, and a certain amount of veterans were allowed to go there with their families for a 2-week period in order to unwind. Wow, that was really nice. Anybody here ever go to a resort hotel when they came over to Vietnam? No, I didn't think so. Governments celebrated the return of the World War II veterans. The government tried to forget Vietnam and those who fought there. The government realized it was a fiasco, but only too late. And rather than accept responsibility for the fiasco, they kind of pigeonholed the whole experience, didn't accept the responsibility for their actions, but now utilized the veteran as a means of getting the burden of responsibility, of moral guilt, of legal guilt, or of their shoulders. We now accepted the responsibility for all that, for all those mixed things that went on over there, for all those unsure things that we weren't really sure about what the hell we were doing. We came home different. We couldn't relate. We felt dislocated, alienated. When we thought we were coming home to a place where we belonged, we felt something has changed. And I, for one, wasn't sure what. I felt like a square peg in a round hole when before I felt very round. When did I develop these corners? But I couldn't put my finger on it. Nobody was there to tell me, Mac, you know what, the war screwed you up. I mean, nobody was there to tell me that, so I didn't know. I knew one thing, I just wanted to chill out for a while. So I just, chilled out for a year, 2 years. I think I'm still chilling out today. You can't blame the families either, because family didn't know any more than we do what the heck was going on. All they knew, was that we were different. Now, they were also bombarded with the media stereotype of the Vietnam veteran as a crazed killer, drug abuser, committer of atrocities, violator of John Wayneism from World War II. They were bombarded with that. And then when they saw how different we were, Jesus is my son? No, he's just different. We saw this. And we even started to think now, we're not the knights in shining armor anymore. As we recognized, as we became aware of our symptoms of our being different, and we understood the kinds of things we could do, the kinds of behaviors we did exhibit in Vietnam, we withdrew. We withdrew as well for a number of reasons. Number one, we couldn't relate to anybody, and number two, we tried to protect them from us. Because we were killers, we were murderers, we were drug-crazed baby killers. We were accepting the stereotype too. So let's protect our loved ones and withdraw. We had no one to do. We had war taint. We were tainted by war and the stereotype. We didn't admit we were Vietnam veterans. We wouldn't talk about Vietnam. We kept it inside. We didn't work out our trauma. We didn't work out the grief. Hopefully we can start to do that now. And this is what this conference is all about. Thank you.